Alex.
Hey.
Thanks for thanks for making time for coming on the show today. Why don't you start by telling us who you are and about the work that you do?
Yeah, so my name's Alex Zeitz. I work for Virgin Voyages, which is one of the newer cruise lines that's been on the industry. I lead our international operations, resiliency, and inclusion. So for me, obviously that includes running our business day to day in a lot of our locations outside the US. But really, what I think we're connecting here today on is the inclusion part of my gig, which is really about how we make Virgin Voyages for our customers. You might hear me call them sailors, and our employees, which you might hear me call them crew,
Okay.
how they feel that they can be part of something, how they feel that they can be connected, how they feel that they have a place, whether that's, as an employee or as a customer. And so that's one thing that I really am proud of and I spend a lot of my time focusing on. And that's again brand wide. So it's really interesting.
That's wonderful to hear. How do you think that a company's mission or their vision, like for how they want the culture to be at work, how does that really shape the culture that you build?
So I think it has to start in the beginning, right? When we were developing the brand, I've been lucky to be here for about 7 years, which is almost the beginning days. There's a few folks before me. But what was really important to us is what we called our brand mission, which is really an epic sea change for all. And when you think about epic, you think of like
Another metaphor.
huge. Exactly, exactly. You think of like huge, right? Epic isn't just basic, it's huge, it's large. Sea change. How does the ocean move, right? The ocean's powerful. We see what it can do. So we wanted to make sure it was epic, large, sea change, huge movement, and for all. And when we did that, we said for all to us means our crew, right? Our employees. As a Virgin company, we start there. A lot of times you'll hear people say they start with maybe the customers, which our customers are so important to us. But if we don't take care of the crew in the beginning, they're not going to be able to do anything else for our customers, right? And that's something that, being a Virgin company, Sir Richard Branson really shares with us. So starting in that core with our crew, our customers, we talk about, our partners, so people who we work with, other companies, where we take our ships, so the communities that we engage with,
Yeah.
as well as the ocean and the environment, right? Because again, being a seafaring brand, if the environment isn't taken care of, then we have nowhere to go, right? So it's really simple for us to have all these five things come together under that one umbrella of Epic Sea Change for All. And it's really at the core of what we do and who we are.
I love it. And I was thinking about the microcosm that actually like being on a ship with no place to leave, how
Mhm.
it raises the stakes
Yeah.
for inclusion and belonging and well-being.
Yeah.
Um, Expectations have changed, right? For what workplaces uh, are for people. Have you seen in these past 7 years a shift for what the expectations are for workplace culture?
Yeah, no, I would definitely say so. I would say it even began with our brand starting. People had high expectations of us. We built our brand of many crew members or employees from other Virgin companies, about 20% or so. We went out and about 20% from hospitality. And then we had, 50% from other cruise lines who were like, what is this? I want to try something new. I want to go out. And then 10% that came from any other business but those. And I think even from the beginning, that displays kind of what we were looking for, diversity of thought, a diversity of access, diversity of knowledge, and really coming together to create this, amazing brand. And I think over the years, the crew have it demonstrated we want to have this, or they came and they thought they wanted this, and now they share they want to have that more, whatever it may be. And I think it came up in as you hinted at, we're not just, one country, one background, right? We have 90 to 100 nationalities on each ship and about 1,000 employees in a floating city. And with that comes day to day. And again, we're also not a 9 to 5 business. It's not like, okay, you finish, you've tolerated your coworker for the day. They live together on the ships, right? They might have a roommate. They might be living in a closer quarters than we would traditionally do on a land-based thing. So it's been really important to us to focus on what we can do to set that up for success, how we have people connection to whatever they have in their outside life, whether it be loved ones, family, and friends. And I think that that has been something that came from the industry in the past. It was like, you went to sea and good luck and make it work. And we're like, all right, we need to figure out how do we give free internet to everyone, which sounds so simple, but in our world, satellite connection and activities are very different and very costly. But we knew that people needed to have that connection to home, that connection to whatever that person may be. That was something that we did, and people came over. And actually, just this weekend, I was out on one of the ships chatting the crew and asking, like, what is it that still keeps you? And they're like, honestly, this is one of the best things. It's so simple, it's so easy. I finish my workday. I grab my phone, I can FaceTime, I talk to my loved ones, I see my kids. It makes working away so much easier. Where in the past and in other brands, they have to pay for that service, or they wait till they get to shore and they have their 2 hour break and they run to a coffee shop and they try to have that connection. So I think basic things like that, which again might sound, super basic to a land-based, employer. In our space, it's such a large difference, or how we set up their rooms, or what food and beverage we offer, or in our space, we've taken away stripes, which is traditional in cruise line to have like, I'm the captain, I've got 4 stripes or 4.5. Well, our world, we know who the captain is, and in cases of emergency, they are in charge. They are the voice of everything. But when it comes to day to day, the uniforms that everyone wear, they don't brag about that. It doesn't, come as like that energy. And it sets a tone that our culture is like everyone's important because we need to have every gig. If we don't have every gig, we won't be able to have our business. So long-winded answer. I think that there's just been so much that we've tried to do from the beginning to set that up. We've also brought people over from other brands because of that. And I think we see that every day they kind of remind us what's good and what's not, which is great.
It sounds great. I love that the hierarchy is kind of downplayed. It's still existent for sure that, because you need to run a ship. But the fact that you kind of everybody is on equal footing visually and
Yeah.
part of the environment, so to speak.
Yeah, no, and I think it even comes up in, like a lot of in a traditional cruise energy, you'd have like this is where the senior officers eat and drink, this is where the officers drink, this
Yeah.
is the petty officers. For us, it's like this is where everyone comes together, and we call it kitchen table because we think about like, that space, where friends and family they all gather around a kitchen table and they have lunch and dinners and breakfasts together. And so, how could we create that environment where it naturally connects the different areas, the different roles, the different groups of people?
I think you're onto something. It's something we hear that, and it's in a lot of religions of breaking bread with somebody, eating with somebody, sharing that experience that we all do. We all eat with others, right? And people,
Yeah.
I love that that is brought into the work that you do. I imagine there's some powerful uh, healing, powerful challenges, and just togetherness that is built through that.
No, I definitely think that comes up. And I think, one thing I always love seeing is when, the founder of Virgin Groups, Richard Branson's on board the ships. That's one of the places he loves to go and connect with the crew,
Yeah.
to see there, to have the meals there, to connect and be present because he knows, right, that that's where all of that really happens, right? It's not just in a work environment, but it's also in that quote unquote off time where there's good laughter and engagement. And, one of the things that we do is we have a role on board our ships called the crew engagement and communications manager. So they're outside of the people environment. They are more connected to activation, activity, day-to-day life. And one of the things is that they're tasked with is how do they create the vibes in that space to make sure that people, can have that quiet moment, or they have that activation. And so we do, a lot comes together through food, right? When we celebrate different religious occasions on board the ship, people are away from their home. And so they expect to have, a large celebration that matches what they're used to having. And so we do it. And it's great because you start to see people connecting, going, I never had this, or I've never known this, or what is this about? Or, oh, tell me what your tradition is, or why is this dessert so colorful and flavored like this? And it's like, well, because at home we have this fruit and we have that fruit. And that person's responsibility is to bring that to life, whether it's visually on the screens or whether it's the music that we play, or,
Yeah.
there are little ways to bring culture and connection to life that aren't just like, hey, everyone, let's sit down and click through this DEI training module, right? It comes to life by including it, by infusing it, and by people also getting to live and share their stories.
There's a saying that I'm gonna butcher, and maybe you know it, but it was like it was an answer to a lack of inclusion or a lack of accepting other people, and the number one way to do that would be to travel and like go to
Mhm.
where you're the outsider and where you're home. And it sounds like you have intention around creating that because everyone's out of their home.
Yeah, no, and I think and we even do it in our corporate office too. We bring things to get to life that, maybe we wouldn't have a large population represented in our office based in South Florida, but we do know that with our, almost 6,000 plus employees or crew at sea, they do come from those nations and cultures and religions and spaces. And, it's not something that everyone has to go do this and participate. It's more of like you come into the office and for some of the holiday celebration, we've got some activation or an artist or a performer or something where people go, huh, I didn't know, or what is that? And you're like, yeah, and actually 10% of your employment population is going to be celebrating this today. So you're participating in something, which then gives it a relevance of what's going on.
Yeah, and it makes it safe to be genuinely curious about the experience
Correct.
and the culture and how others are just living their day-to-day lives without it being high stakes.
Correct.
It's great. I imagine that having Sir Richard Branson show up and be at the table every once in a while uh, has an impact as well. And it sounds like leadership is on board.
Oh yeah.
With all of the challenges and the day-to-day that go into, on the ship, everybody has their duties, they need to do it in the corporate offices. How
Mhm.
would you handle folks that, in theory they're on board, but they see doing this work as something extra, or it might challenge like their actual day job, so to speak?
Yeah.
How do you handle those type of attitudes?
I think for me, well, I think part of it is we set the tone of our culture from the beginning, right? We when you start your first day, you join our brand, you go through some training, or maybe the second day, but you go through a training which is really focused on of who we are, which is explaining that efficacy change for all and what we expect around that, how it intertwines with your gig that you're going to be working. And so we really kind of set from the beginning that this is how it works here, and this is how we work. We want you to question, we want you to push, we want you to make us better. But these are going to be tenets of who we are. Underneath all of the Epic Sea Change for All, we've got some specific kind of modules that break down of what we mean by that. And one of them is Dive into Different, which is our creed around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And it's very clear of who we are, what we're going after, what we want to be, and how we want people to all have opportunities to thrive. So I find that, if people start getting in the space of, well, by spending this time learning this thing, we're not going to make money. It's like, well, let's actually pause and ask, like, why are we asking ourselves that type of question? There's so much data out there that shows that, a diversity of thought, diversity of action, of having different perspectives allows businesses to thrive. And so if we need to go down the route of the ROI of being good people, we will. But our brand is really about like, this is the space, right? We all know how it feels to not be included, right? Sometime in our life, whether it's the playground, whether it's getting picked for a sporting event, whether it's, showing up for something, we all know how it feels to be not included in something. And
Absolutely.
we want to make a space where that isn't happening. And that has to be intentional, but it also isn't that hard because everyone knows that emotion. And I think for us, we've focused on the concept of infusion, right? So how do we infuse this into who we are, right? Your day one, you're taught about it, right? The trainings, and we talk about like customer service training, and we talk about belonging. We also talk about, accessibility of the brand, which is, something that I'm tasked with delivering with, some amazing team. It's really important to say, like, when we do our customer service training, it's not just like, let's talk about the accessible training now. No, it's like, this is how we help sailors or our customers. And some examples will include someone that might be a wheelchair user, and that's a natural way to infuse it. And you go through things. Now, yes, there's more specific training that we need to do to make sure people are safe and secure. But when it comes to like day-to-day examples, day-to-day activities, day-to-day discussion, if we kind of intertwine, weave in, it just becomes natural and part of who we are as a brand.
I like the infuse aspect of it and that it takes such a prominent place. You mentioned something while you were talking that part of the environment you're creating is the safety to challenge or to bring up new ideas.
Mhm.
I've learned in my experience that the term psychological safety has
Yeah.
a lot of components and they're related to innovation. Because you could have all the diversity of thought, but if the environment isn't right or safe enough to speak up, or if you're the only person about to challenge the status quo and that doesn't feel safe, or maybe you don't feel safe to learn or not be good at something already, it can really cascade into the other direction.
Yeah.
Less
Yeah.
engagement. Do you specifically leverage that concept of psychological safety in the work that you do? How would you put
Yeah.
that into words?
No, I think so. It's something that we also measure as well, right? So when it comes to like doing our employee surveys of sorts, like it's one thing that we definitely look at.
Metrics. Everybody, we
Yeah,
need
exactly. But I think when it comes down to the day to day, yeah, I think we start by like leadership, for example. I think we're through about 90% of our leadership board, which we believe that mid-level leadership is so important because they're the front line really of all of the core employee moments. But working with them on inclusive behaviors of leadership, right? That's been part of our kind of our connection and our discussion, and so they can see that and they can understand that, and I think that one of those things that we bring up in there is that discussion and is like, how do we engage and what are we going to do? We also work on our annual goal setting. There's like the SMART method, right? Which is like, the whole thought process. Well, we call it SMART E, and we add IE to it, and we give each one a task to make sure that they can create a diversity, equity, inclusion type goal. And some people are kind of overwhelmed by that concept. They're like, oh, what is this going to mean? And I'm not going to be able to change the world. And I'm already an ally. And what are you asking of me? And you're like, let's just breathe and say, when you do your next team meeting, maybe go around the room and just ask everyone if they have a thought on this topic. Or maybe that could be just giving a task to someone you normally don't give a task to. That's an easy way to include someone that is not trying to solve a peace crisis somewhere in the world, right? But if we do these little steps, it starts to create that culture of that energy. And,
Yeah.
not everyone picks up right away, or not everyone can see it in that light. But you start to share like how simple and easy this can be. And I go back to that whole like we've all been in that space where we weren't included in something, and maybe you don't even realize you're doing it, but you're doing that.
In my work, and in some modern neuroscience, they've actually shown that social rejection
Mhm.
registers in our brain in the same way that like a punch to the face would. That level of pain is there, but it's even worse because with time, like a physical punch, the memory and the experience of that pain fades. But if you remember that social rejection, it's like your
Mhm.
brain kind of relives it, and the pain is just as strong,
Mhm.
oftentimes,
Yeah.
if it's not addressed and you don't do the work on it. So it is really powerful,
Yeah.
powerful stuff. I think it's great that you're addressing these things head on and bringing that into the culture.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's something that is so intense. And I think for us, it's, we recognize that we worked with outside individuals to kind of say, what does our program look like? How do we balance these out? And we worked with, an agency that's based in the UK on really diversity, equity, inclusion, and really belonging from a maritime perspective. Because again, like I hinted at, we have we aren't just the standard business 9 to 5. There's lots of layers of what it takes to do what we do, and there's lots of things coming together. I mean, I've had discussions with crew who are like, I want to be part of something. I want to be an ally, but I don't, this group doesn't even exist in my country. I'm like, I think they do. They just might not be spoken of, or they might not be available, or they might not be able to be truly honest about who they are. Right. And so I think that we navigate that and we share that and people go, okay, well, we're great. Like, all right, I won't use this word, or I think about that, or I didn't realize that that meant that, or, like there's different things, and I think that it takes that time to be patient and to understand and to also set up a culture where you give people the benefit of the doubt, right? I think it's so easy to be like, oh, they meant to do that, or they going after this, or they meant to say that, or they were trying to go that. Like, well, were they or weren't they, or how do we know that, or did you know where they're coming from? Let's peel the onion just a little, right? We won't obviously accept any unacceptable behavior, but let's understand where this is coming from, why it's coming from, and what knowledge they have.
There is so much space between policy violation and actual, like, not prosecutorial in that sense, but is something against a
Yeah.
policy. Um, there's so much space for discussion and understanding, but it seems like culturally, it's just higher stakes. And one misstep would
Correct.
be like labeling somebody as a certain way for so
Mhm.
long, or forever in perpetuity after they've done it. Um, how do you like does that exist in your realm? And then how do you make it safe enough for people to not be good at inclusion if they're trying to be good at inclusion?
Yeah, I think one thing is our crew will be very honest with us. We've made decisions before where we were well intended as a brand. We look at it, we think, yeah, this is going to be great. This is going to answer this question, or it'll be clear to everyone. And the way it was communicated didn't land, or it wasn't fully communicated in the way that they needed to hear it. And they came back to us and very quickly. And I think one thing that you have to have safety nets involved in how you do that, right? Having that crew engagement manager on board the ship, they aren't part of the people realm. I purposely did not want them to be part of people because there's that stigma. With all due respect for those who work in the people side of business, they're like, if I'm telling HR people, I'm going to get in trouble, right? There's that energy that lives there, right? And so we wanted to break that down to be like, hey, like this person is here. You can be real with them. If there's something that needs to be addressed, they're gonna elevate it to the right people. And so sometimes they come to us and like, hey, that message didn't land, and you're like, really? It was clear. We had all our talking points. Everyone knew. The leadership found out, and they're like, no, it didn't land, and it was too wordy. Like this is what we're having problems with. So we've learned over the years, one, to preview it with that audience, to be like, hey, how do you think this is going to land? And they're like, well, maybe start here, right? And then you have to look at different ways to bring people on the journey. And some people look, they go, oh, that takes too much time. I just want this done. Let's do it. Let's go. And you're like, all right, but the aftermath is going to be a lot more time and energy and money. So let's like take this journey and let's go on this space. And so I think it takes brave people to step up, but it also takes a system that in place that says, let's ask the right people. This doesn't affect us day to day. It does them, or vice versa.
So I've seen a trend in in the industry that resilience,
Hmm.
well-being
Hmm.
are closer to inclusion than they were
Yeah.
before. It's like we didn't necessarily see these as elements of it. And I wanted to talk to you because you held both of those in your title to some degree. And at the top, you said we're going to focus more on the inclusion piece, but do you see a connection between the resilience and the inclusion?
Oh yeah, I think it's a lot of like what we need to be setting up to make sure the business is long-term successful, right? And there's lots of things in resiliency planning that are very scientific and very like, we need to have this and how do we do it with emergency and how do we take care of this? But it's also like what are we doing to make sure that our employees are geared up for the next role? What are we doing to make sure that they are prepped for what they need to be doing? How do we look at that when situations do occur that we're there to support them through those things. So I think that it's very much about that because if those things go well or prepared or they feel supported, then they feel like they're part of something. And people feel like they belong, they're so much more likely to stay at your brand participate at a higher level, right? So I think, when factors such as like, burnout start to really creep up or other things, then you have to start focusing in on like what is causing that? Why is it causing that? Are we being transparent about these things? Let's review them. Let's engage. And sometimes we have to say it's gonna be intense and tough for a little while because we have X, Y, and Z coming in. Or we have to push these sales initiatives or experiences or we've done some specific things. On the other side, we can say, all right, like this is why we're doing that. This is what it's going to mean for us. This is the time frame that we need to focus at this level. And I think that if you're clear about those things, it starts to increase the trust and kind of create clear pathways to where you're trying to get to. And if you don't have that transparency, then I think that it really kind of causes people to struggle and then that really starts to get towards when is this going to happen and the burnout increases and a lot of the things that are in that space.
I wish there was a different word than resilience because resilience carries with it a certain meaning in the
Hmm.
context, especially that you were just talking about it, and it is so important. But then also, I think in that last discussion there, the point that you were making, I'm wondering that like resilience in the fact of like, okay, maybe the intent of what I was trying to do it
Hmm.
landed wrong. Maybe I used language that's outdated, or I fell into a stereotype of somebody well-intentioned, and then that person gives me the feedback. Or maybe they were upset and they really gave me that feedback.
Right.
Resilience is important in that aspect of
Yeah.
how do I take this feedback? But I wish the word was different because it's like I don't want to bounce back. I want to bounce into a greater level of
Forward. Yeah.
standing. Yeah, I want to bounce into a different shape
Hmm.
instead of rebound to where exactly I was. Um, so do you see that level of overlap or using that term, or do you have another term when people are thinking that, oh, I've got to do a little growth and I just got exposed?
No, I think that we definitely have that. I think, what's great is I will have everyone from frontline crew to senior executives with the brand, they'll be like, hey, struggling through this one, do you have thoughts? And sometimes I'm like, oh, this is, maybe take a peek at this, or let's read this together, or let's run through this, or let's revisit what happened and why that person might have done that. And sometimes I'm like, okay, maybe what they heard was, or let's see if in their culture, or let's do some more digging. Again, not saying I'm the guru of all this, but it's more of like a sounding board. And I think having that space, and then we go through and sometimes like, oh yeah, like this is how we did misstep and how do we fix this and what is we going to focus on? And this needs to take the top level leadership to come in and say, we acknowledge this and we're moving forward by doing X, Y, and Z. And also, are we good with this as the acknowledgement? Is this what we need to hear? And we work through. So there's been situations where we've learned that again, starting up a company, even though Virgin Group has been around for 50 plus years, we're really 3.5 years into operation. And we grew from, about 200 people to 7,000 in about a 3-year period. So there's things that will occur when you grow that fast and when you're moving quickly. And, also when we were that successful, right? We're selling out and we're receiving all these awards for what we're doing. And I think it's like there's a lot of that pressure, but it's also like, how do we acknowledge, stop, look, review? And I think to your point is people need to say, that's okay, I made this mistake. I've learned from this. I'm going from here, and this is what I want to do. And these are the behaviors I will change or adjust. And again, I think that's what I love having is that energy around people want to do that. And we've created a culture where, it's okay to say, I don't know. Can you help me?
That is the culture. Like nugget that we're all trying to get to. I'm amazed that you've been able to bring together so many different worldviews, so many elements of difference, and create a space where people are having fun, people are thriving at work while they do it. So the mission from the top, the leadership is living the values. Folks like you are ensuring that people have what they need to be inclusive, to be leaders, to accept new ideas, to grow from feedback. That if there was one piece of advice that you would give other companies that are trying to create cultures and future-proof from whatever changes maybe coming down the line, what would that be?
Um, I would say like, work to create a clear culture plan, right? Clear culture roadmap of what you want to have, what you want to be. And then I think it's literally getting everyone around the campfire of sorts to say, like, this is where we're going, this is where we're heading. You've seen brands around the world where they stop and they pause, and we're planning one now where it's like, just in general, it's like, let's revisit everything. We grew so fast. Let's make sure we all are on the same page, which takes money and time to say, let's stop our operation, or let's try to do this in a way that that everyone really has a pause moment. And I think that, when not to point at another brand, but when there's a famous coffee company in the US that maybe have misstepped in the past, and they paused and they said, you know what, this isn't who we are. This is what we're doing, and we need to gather. And did it make everything perfect? Probably not, but it set a tone of like, this is what we expect from the top down. And they closed their doors. They got some of the best folks in the DEI industry to come together to create training. A colleague of mine, she led that, and hearing her speak about it and what it was and what it took, I'm like, yeah, that's a ton of money and time to shut down,
Hmm.
and to the point where, not to sidebar, but she told me a story about how they actually had to put a special order in with Apple to get the amount of iPads they needed to host those sessions because there wasn't even that many in the US. Right? Like, that's how committed they were. And again, that sent that big message to their team of, this is what we're going to be, this is what we're going to be doing, and this is what it's going to take. Now, not everyone
So
has that
this,
money
I
and
just want to
time.
pause for 1 second. This company had a misstep and they shut down every single store for one day to dedicate to a training. I just
Yes.
want to make sure that's not lost on people in the
Yeah.
context. And it sounds like a lot of other things to get over just to make that happen.
Yeah. And I
I
think
was a
like,
barista back in the day, so I know
so
what you're talking about.
you know the company I'm speaking of. But
Yeah.
so I think about like, that's that energy where they quickly said, "Hey world, this is who we are. This is what we believe in. This is what we're going to be doing." Right? And I think companies on a smaller stage can do that behind the scenes of, this is what our brand is. This is what we're going to doing. This is the roadmap that we're going to take to get there. And you have to put the actions and the money, but also the actions, right? Because I mean, there's lots of lovely consultants out there in the world who will take all your money to create these amazing plans for you, right? But if you don't embrace them, make them part of who you are, and make sure that they're a right fit for your brand in the way that they're being done, then I think it's going to fall flat. But if you do, then that sets the tone. And like I said, we've gotten there because our leadership 100% agrees with what it is, and that's who they are, and that's why we are kind of all came together. But we've been in other places where that wasn't, and how you make that change is setting that tone, bringing everyone together, understanding, sharing, and creating that transparency.
And I also heard pause and listen to your people in there as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Alex, this has been such a really great conversation. I wish we had more time, but we've got to wrap it up here. Thank you so much for making time to talk with me today.
Of course, it's my pleasure. It's been great.